You know, there's a lot of talented people on YouTube sharing the workbenches that they've built. And I've taken inspiration from an awful lot of them, two of which I'll share links in my description down below. But I'm not building from scratch. I'm taking the pieces that I already had, both in materials and in this chest of drawers, and I'm stitching them all together to bring this workbench alive. And that's why I call it my Frankenbench. Let's take a look at some of the features of this bench, other than the fact that it's mobile and it sits on top of a chest of drawers. When plugged in, it has a lighted magnifying glass task light. I have a crafting mat that's 1.5 by 3 feet of working area. Now when I want to do woodworking, I remove the mat and it reveals a series of 3/4 inch dog holes. Now using shop-made dogs that are made from 3/4 inch oak dowel and a little bit of walnut, I can open this rockler quick release vise and surface clamp my material. I can also, of course, use the jaws of the vise to clamp in the traditional manner. Now, along with that T-track on the back side, you'll see a series of dog holes. And these dog holes will accept 3/4 inch dowel jigs, such as this resting bar, that will allow me to take a panel, rest it on the bar, clamp it in place, and if this was something I needed to work on the top, I could, but also it's held at 90 degrees to the bench top. Now the same stock rest can be used on the top of the bench as well. Just take my material, butt it up against the stop, and use it that way. I can of course clamp to the edges on the front and on the side. Well, that's just an example of the many ways with which to clamp materials to the bench. Now let's see how it was made. Erin and I are so happy to share this project with you. So, Frankenbench, well, it means using what we already had, stitch it together, etc., etc. We had this piece of walnut that I had bought at a garage sale that was poorly water damaged and checked. So we had to strip it along the glue joints and go back through the milling process of jointing, ripping, planing, and then finally the glue up. We set that aside to dry in the clamps before moving on to working on our apron. We chose OSB board, which came from the mezzanine of the old workshop. So we cut the back panel to size, and then Aaron ripped a whole bunch of strips that then he brought over to the miter saw and began cutting to length. Now the reason for all these strips is we're going to laminate them together. 3 pieces makes about 1.5 inches for the vise apron on the front by the drawers, on the side where the vise will attach, and on the back panel. Now here he's gluing 3 pieces together that will become the vise support part of the apron. And you can see that we had to pay close attention to the alignment of the edges of the blank to make sure that when they were dried, they were ready for final assembly. Now, places where we had corners, we either used a saddle type joint or a mortise and tenon type joint. In this case, you can see that there's 2 layers that are shorter than the 3rd layer. And again, we had to line them up to make sure that they would assemble correctly. Now moving on to the full-size back panel, Aaron and I began laying layers of strips around the perimeter. Now each one will overlap the other, giving that corner a significant amount of support in the glued up joint. When we started this project, there was a lot of ambition in what we wanted to get accomplished for this shop, and we talked about a lot of ideas. But building this workbench was certainly the first on our list. Having this workbench in place will allow us to work on other projects using the clamping convenience of dog holes in a vise. Now here, this part needed to be cut out with a jigsaw, so Aaron carefully aligned it, made his cut marks, and then finished it off with a jigsaw. More glue. We didn't bother spreading the glue. We just put ample glue. There's so much surface area on these strips that it just wasn't necessary. Now we moved on to the vise, and I took a pattern right from the yoke of the vise to locate the holes before bringing the glued up piece over to the drill press and then drilling the 7/8 holes that were needed. Now we get to assemble the apron together, the three pieces, and I'm using deck screws on these two corners, and it really drew this soft material tightly together. Clamps, of course, kept it in alignment. The glue blocks are being applied. We'll drill them out later for the holes that will attach the apron to the worktop. Well, after we stop fumbling around with the glue, we'll be able to do that. And here you can see that there's 4 layers on the back panel. Off camera, I put a coat of paint. It was just some paint that I had in the shop. It's just using it as a primer. I routed the groove for the T-track and drove the screws in. Now to the dog holes. As you can see, I'm using a jig that I purchased from 3x3 Custom Tamar. She built a beautiful workbench, and I'm so impressed with her work that I just couldn't rationalize the layout and inaccuracies of placing center punches and drill holes in the bench, and a CNC template was the best way to go. I've never done this before, so on the back panel, I basically was practicing how to use the jig. I was successful on my first try, so you'll see more of this when I get to the worktop. Now here you can see how the full assembly rests on the chest, and I'm ready for the finish. And so I'm not going to show you all the finish, it's just a little touch of the red and the black that I use in my shop. Now again, Frankenbench, using what we already have. I had a oak stair tread that I bought for the picture frame keepsake box, and I didn't build it. I built the prototype, and that was good enough. So I had this piece of oak in the shop and decided to go ahead and rip that up and laminate the vise block from that one piece of oak. Now I figured that the interior pieces could be pieced together and then laminated, and it should be plenty strong for a lifetime. Now, the best way to spread glue is with your fingers, of course. Apply the clamps and let it dry. Here I'm finishing the vise block to the point of dimensioning it, ready for attaching the vise. Move our attention to the bench top. Using a circular saw, we cut the ends off, and then I apply a 3-part shop finish to the bottom only. because once I attach the vise and the apron, I won't be able to get back to this area. Pocket hole jigs are used here to pre-drill the fastening along the edge of the back panel to the top. Now this is securely fastened. I do not want this joint to move, so these holes are all tight. But the front of the apron, I oversized the holes in the blocks before driving in screws, and that will allow some wood movement of the top. I located the holes in the vise block, drilled them on the drill press, and then test fit the vise. Pilot holes, hand tighten screws, and the vise is installed. One thing I did not account for was the wiggle room in the vise rods and the threaded portion of the vise. So when I turned it around, it did have a little bit of movement. Moving on to flattening the bench top, I used a raking light and a straight edge to identify any high spots. Now once again, this worktop had been sitting in my workshop for about 8 or 9 months before I picked up to this point. And I was kind of surprised to see that it conditioned with any movement, but there was room for planing. So I used the hand plane with a very, very slim shavings coming off, but it really did the trick. It brought it right nice and flat. Just a little bit of sanding. I've never really used a plane to this extent before, and my inexperience showed with a couple of gouges, but it was too much to sand out, so I'm just going to let it be. All right, so the shop blend oil finish, this really brings out the beauty in the walnut. This is the first coat. I had the vise block clamped tightly. My idea was that I could do that all at the same time and keep from getting any oil on the face of the vise block area, because I'll be attaching some cork there later. All right, so once that was all done, I took the vise block back off and put the taper cuts on 3 sides. This really has no purpose other than to give it a little bit of aesthetic so it doesn't look so heavy. Now here you can see I'm cutting out the rubber cork gasket material. This is purchased from Auto Supply for gaskets, and using 3M77 adhesive, I'm applying it to the apron where the vise is mounted. Flush trim bit on the router, make short work of the perimeter. I cut a starting hole with the razor knife before using it on the holes for the vise. So now you'll see a detailed use of the jig for the dog holes that Tamar had designed and made available for purchase, and they're set up with 3-inch on center hole layout. So I put tape over the sections and the holes that I did not want to drill so I wouldn't accidentally drill in a row that I didn't want to. Now this first alignment using the socket screws was perfect for me. So I set that up and used double-sided tape to hold it down before clamping to make sure it didn't move. And then setting up my plunge router with a 1/4-inch diameter straight bit and the template collar, I began routing the holes. And then I realized that the template collar was loose. So I tightened that back up and continued on, not realizing that it was now just a little bit off center. That turned out to be a blessing later. You'll see that I discovered what was going on, and I ran the router in all directions to equal the hole to the template. That made it just a little bit larger than the 3/4 inch dowel, so they actually fit nicely. Not tight where I couldn't move them in and out, but they would actually fall into the hole on their own. Now the straight bit didn't go deep enough in the worktop, so I had to come back with a very aggressive drill bit to bring the hole deeper into the bench top, but not all the way through. I wanted to prevent blowout, so the tape is telling me where to stop, so only the point reaches the bottom. I turned the assembly upside down and finished the hole from the back side using the bit. Now I still got a little bit of tear out, but it's the bottom side of the workbench and it worked out just fine. And here you can see after all the holes are done, I missed the vise. That was no accident. It was on purpose to miss the vise on those holes. But when I reassembled the vise and turned it back over, I found out that the vise block now was proud. And I did not want to fiddle with the holes with the screws, so I decided to plane that back down and prepared to drill the dog holes in the vise block. And here you can see how well that was accomplished again using the template. Now I did have to use the vacuum to clear the hole each time. There's no vacuum on my plunge router. After the holes were drilled and satisfied with that, I came back with the chamfering bit on the palm router, and boy, they cleaned up nice. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if there's ideas or features that I can add as accessories to a dog hole bench. Until next time, be an early riser, get up, get going, have fun, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.